What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today we're going to be talking about the fourth and final qualifier of the Limitless Online series. That's going to be held this weekend, and I have two of my friends and teammates and guests here today. We got Kenny and Lee, and we're going to discuss Q4, what we think's going to happen, what the good decks are, what the popular decks are, things like that. And I have some questions that some viewers asked on Twitter and Facebook and Discord. So if you were not a part of that and you had questions you wanted to ask, make sure you're following on Twitter and you join the Discord server so you can ask those questions next time. And before we start, just shout out to PotownStore.com, my lovely sponsor and the best place for you to get ptcgo codes. Use code Celio for 5% off there for your ptcgo code. Sorry, I was just getting another window set up and got distracted. Lee and then Kenny, why don't y'all introduce yourself for the viewers?
Hey, I'm Lee. For those of you who don't know me, I started playing shortly after the 2017 World Championships. So it's like my third year playing. I'm a member of Team Gas, and my most notable accomplishments are top 4 at Anaheim Regionals, the first year I played with Zorak Zodia, and recently made top 32 at the last Limitless Qualifier.
Awesome. So we have somebody with some good experience in the Rebel Clash best of one Limitless format here. And how about you, Kenny? What have you done in Pokemon?
My name is Kenny Wisdom, longtime player. Started playing in 2009-ish. Mostly do commentary now. You'll see me on regional streams, NAIC, some other ICs, World, stuff like that. Been streaming recently myself, playing ptcgo, member of Team Gas. These guys have really helped me out. Writer, kind of doing a little bit of everything, hoping to get back into actually playing more tournaments when we can again.
Awesome. Great. Cool. And are you both playing in Q4?
Yes.
Yes, I will be.
Cool. Now, we had another guest plan. Not sure if he's going to be popping in at any time throughout the discussion. Kevin Kruger, who's actually ranked number 3 in the run for the Limitless Invitational. So hopefully he'll pop in at some point and we can also hear what he thinks. But I know he's been pretty busy lately. So let's start this off by talking about Q3. I have a frequency distribution chart up here. I've talked about it on the channel already. We'll have some more coverage about it over on ptcgstats.com, either the day you're seeing this video or shortly thereafter. And so Aram was the most popular deck at 212 people playing it, 17% of the day one meta share. It was significantly higher than any other deck. It was in a popularity tier of its own. Kenny, did you expect that out of Aram?
I didn't expect it to be like literally the most popular and most successful deck, but I think I did have a little bit. I was a little higher on Aram going into the event. I think it was kind of like maybe not super slept on exactly, because obviously it's just been around forever, but I think it kind of was under a lot of people's radar, but I think even the people that expected it to do well couldn't have expected it to be as dominant as it was.
Awesome. And how about you, Lee?
Yeah, I definitely expected either Aram or Dragapult to be the most played deck in Q3 just because of the new boost it got, like the horror energy for Dragapult, the speed energy, and the Bolton for Aram. So I did expect Aram to be the majority of the meta, but like Kenny said, I didn't expect it to be as big as it was.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I kind of second that. So if you've been watching the channel and you saw all the videos leading up to Q3, about a week to 2 out of Q3, Aram was not one of my top decks. It wasn't one of the decks I was expecting to be in the top 3 most popular. But then when we got to the discussion a few days before the event, by that time it had become hyped up. More lists have come out. People were starting to respect it more. And it kind of just built up and up over the course of leading up to the tournament. And like the kind of thing that happens frequently with these, like the decks that get hyped, is the deck that gets hyped right at the right time so that the hype doesn't die down the day before the tournament. Like it all lines up perfectly, and I think that's kind of what happened with Pika. Like the hype peaked right at the tournament. So the next couple decks down, actually before we talked about the next couple decks, Pika wasn't only popular, it was also very successful. It went from being 17% of day one, and it had an 18% conversion rate into day two, which is really, really good for a deck that had over 200 players. So almost 1 out of 5 players that piloted the deck made day two, which is kind of ridiculous. And then almost 30% of day two was Pika, which is a lot. So I think you guys already touched on that you didn't expect it to be that dominant. Do you think it can emulate that again, Lee?
I think it can after its success in Q3. I think Pika just has the natural advantage of being a naturally aggressive deck. Like getting off turn 1 full blitz can be really difficult for a lot of decks. So I think that's one of the most popular reasons. Speed, energy, obviously gives them an extra draw boost. So I do think Pika will be not as played as it was in Q3, but definitely one of the most popular decks out there.
Kenny, do you think it can make that success happen again?
Yeah, I agree largely with Lee. Like one of the things I've been saying about Pika, on stream or people ask me or just in general conversation is like the turn 1 draws or the potential for like really explosive turn 1 and turn 2s are just so big with that deck, especially now with speed energy, that I think that's just always going to be like an inherent power of the deck that it has over a lot of other decks. So I don't think we can really expect it to repeat a first and second and the largest metagame share or whatever, but it's definitely going to be a factor to be one of the top decks.
Awesome. So before we move on to the other decks, I do want to give Pika its time because I think it deserves to be talked about a fair amount. I've had questions like, is Pika still a safe play? Is Pika still one of the best decks? Is it going to be heavily countered by fighting decks and stuff like that? Kenny, do you think it's still a very good play? Do you think it got better or worse? Do you think it's considerably safe? Do you think it's going to be heavily countered? Any thoughts on any of it?
I think it's still a totally reasonable play. It's a really good deck. I would expect more people to be playing counters. I would expect a lot more Mews and things like that. I would expect some more decks that are favorable versus Pika. But again, I just think the inherent power of the deck and the way that it's built and all the new tools it has it's just always going to be a safe play, at least for the Rebel Clash format.
Mm-hmm. Lee, any disagreement?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Kenny that I think more people are actually going to play a counter to Pika now, such as the Mew that like you said. Personally, I'm actually interested to see what kind of interesting fighting decks might pop up. Because usually when one deck dominates the meta in a previous tournament, other decks in the next tournament will play a counter. So I've been playing against some pretty unique fighting decks on ladder, so I'm hoping to see more of those in Q4.
Cool. Do we think any of those fighting decks can be viable, or do they just beat Pika? Like some questions I've got are like Sandaconda, Phalanx, Excadrill, which did make day 2 at Q3. I'm sure there's a bunch of other fighting type attackers that can give Pika a rough time, but do you think any of them are viable, or is it just see how many Pikas you can hit?
I definitely think those are viable, especially because they have such large damage output. Like Excadrill, I believe, does 120 for a single fighting energy, which is pretty good for stage 1. And then, Sandaconda is just naturally aggressive. It's like basically a Bulu that you can do a bunch of damage with. So I do think, obviously, it's meant to just destroy Pika, but I do think it has a chance against other decks as well because of its natural aggression.
Cool. Kenny, last question for you about Pika for now. Do you think Mew actually counters Pika?
It's interesting. I think you should, if you're going to determine whether to play Mew or not, I think you should look at why your deck has a rough matchup versus Pika or why it can lose to Pika. I don't think Mew is the right answer for every deck, but I do think it's a fairly clean way to prevent them completely blowing you out. That being said, Pika again is just so strong that it can just get in under the Mew. It can kind of ignore the Mew, but I think it's a totally reasonable tech to play against it if you're worried about the matchup.
For sure.
Yeah. I wanted to add a little to that as possible. I think Mew would be really good if we didn't see each other's deck lists in the qualifier, because then they could just load up a Pika and then you drop the Mew and basically waste their energy to attack on the Pika. But since we can see each other's deck lists, players can kind of play around that. The thing with Mew is that it forces them to approach a different line of play, like attach them attach the extra energy to a Raichu or a Bolton on the bench instead of the Pikarom itself for the attack bolt. So I think that's like the good and bad of Mew when you can see each other's deck list in the qualifier.
Yeah, what's
That's a good point.
interesting, what that reminds me of is I can't remember which year it was. I guess 09 or 2010, when the junior or senior had the translation of Dusknoir out on the table, and he had the Duskull in the deck, but did not actually play the Dusknoir, and he just had the translation of it out there to bait his opponent into playing around it. Mew kind of reminds me of that because you can put it in your deck, but you don't always have to be able to reliably get it out, because if your opponent knows Mew's in the deck, they might never put the 4th, 5th, and 6th energies on the Pika with the full blitz, or set up a board state to potentially do it. Now, of course, they can get a surprise one, like double energy switch attached on their mountain or something like that, but I do think it, like you said, it's different because it's open deck lists, and just having it in your deck can potentially make them just never go for that tag bolt play, which is really, really, like, that's meta on top of the meta. Like, it's really something interesting that we don't talk about too often in Pokemon. Okay, so let's talk about the other decks. So, Baby Blounds, ADPZ, and Dragapult VMAX are the other archetypes I consider to be in Tier 1 along with Pika. These decks all had between 11.5 to 12.5% of the Day 1 meta share. So, not really significantly different from each other. If you round it out, they all had about 150 players playing each of them, Baby Blounds, ADPZ, and Dragapult VMAX variants. So, Baby Blounds had around an 18% success rate. I'm sorry, 16% success rate. Dragapult VMAX had a 15% success rate, and then ADPZ had half of that at around an 8 to 9% success rate. So less than half successful as Pika was, although it was played just as much as Baby Blounds and Dragapult VMAX. Now, Lee, you did play ADPZ. Why did you think it was a solid deck going into the tournament? Why did you decide to play it? And how did you think about ADPZ as a play for the tournament after everything was said and done?
Yeah, so going to Q3, I was like, I want to play a fast, super consistent deck to make sure, since it's best of one, I want to make sure I didn't lose to myself as often as I did in the first 2 qualifiers. So I was looking at ADPization, and I realized that it honestly doesn't have a lot of favorable matchups. You have a lot of 50-50. The thing is, the deck is so fast and aggressive that you can possibly get off turn 1 alter creation going second, or you can just go first and get the turn 2 alter creation. So it's just the natural aggression that the deck has to be able to take an extra prize card is nice. Also, my thinking was that if I can just alter creation and target down the Denes, because most decks play the Denes to set up. So if I can just do that and target the Denes, it doesn't really matter like what they're playing as long as I can get those 3 prizes off the simple Denes. So that's why I decided to play ADPization.
And what did you think about it after the tournament, seeing that you were 29th place, if I'm not mistaken, and you were the highest placing ADPZ deck, and there weren't any others? I think there was like 1 or 2 others in top 64 potentially.
Yeah, I think there was 1 other maybe.
It was pretty scarce up there in the top placings. So were you surprised that you were the highest placing at 29th?
Yeah, I was a little surprised because I thought people would go back to ADPization sort of like a comfort pick just because it's been such a good deck for like the past few months. I guess though one thing it has, like, people complain that it's a little slower because Dragapult can attack you turn 2, Pikarom can attack you turn 1, Baby Blounds can just knock you out, like one-shot you. So I guess that's like the main complaint people had, but that's why I played like a super turbo version with Acrobikes and Energy Switch to be able to match the speed of those decks.
Cool. Kenny, over to you on ADPZ as well. So it was played, it was tied for second most popular, but it was not even close to being as successful as the other decks. So what do you think happened there?
I know a lot of the criticism around ADP right now has been just like, it is slow, like Lee said, you do have to basically take the first 2 turns off, if not more, if things don't go well for you. The damage output can also be a little bit low. I just don't think. I think it's still a good deck. I think it's not as dominant as it once was because it's not that much better than everything. if that makes sense. Like the things that there are things that are better or as good as it, and the things that it is better than, it's not. They have gained new tools. It is not just dominant over almost everything like it used to be.
Yeah, I want to add that the main thing that I found wrong with ADP Zacian was it didn't have reliable gust effects before, which we now have with Boss's Order. Like before, you had to play custom catchers and Pokemon catchers to bring your Pokemon or to gust your opponent's Pokemon, but now you have Boss's Order and you have Outer Gust, so it's like guaranteed gust effect. So I thought that would be like a big factor as to why people would have played ADP Zacian in Q3, just because you have an extra dimension to the deck now that you didn't have before. So that's why I was a little surprised that I didn't do as well as I thought it should have.
Now, there's always like factors we can't like know for sure, but you could potentially theorize that maybe like the better players decided to play Baby Blondes or Dragapult VMAX, or maybe people that are good players but are less experienced with ADPZ hopped on at last moment or something like that. One of the things that I've been thinking about that I think is pretty likely is that ADPZ players focused too much on beating Dragapult VMAX and underestimated Pika and Baby Blounds with things like stamps or even power plants or the Mew for Pika and even the Mew for Baby Blounds, because sometimes they finish out the game with Cramorant on your Dedenne. Do you think that could have been a potential issue, that they overvalued the Dragapult matchup?
For me, I didn't really think about the Dragapult matchup that much because I thought I had a decent matchup against it. I was worried about the Pika because I did expect that to be a big play in Q3. I ended up facing 6 Pika and I went 3-3 against it. So like the matchup isn't great. Like I said, you can target down their Dedennes for easy prizes, but they can basically outmatch your aggression, if that makes sense. Like they can outspeed you on the first turn because they put damage on you on the first turn, and you have to take the first 2 or 3 turns to alter creation. So I guess that's a big reason why ADP may have not done well. Maybe because the ADP players ran into a lot of Pika and just couldn't match their speed.
True. Kenny, any other thoughts on ADPZ?
I think it's a good play. I would agree with Lee that I think the narrative that I was building at least was just that a bunch of people played ADP and it just kind of ran into all the Pikas, and like Lee said, it's kind of a coin flip matchup, and if the better players are playing Pika, it's probably going to go their way more. I do think like the combination of altered creation with Zacian V is just kind of this like inherently powerful thing that I think will probably ebb and flow into the metagame more as people maybe like adapt the lists, or the metagame changes in a way that's favorable for it. Like the deck's definitely not dead or anything. I would expect to see a ton of it. I do think it's still tier 1, but it's just not kind of what it used to be.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and I think also people wanted to play the Jirachi Prism combo with Zacian because they thought that was naturally better, like ADP, because you can take an extra prize with Jirachi Prism. So they thought if that can do that, why do I have to play ADP? Yeah. So I think that's why like people want to play around with the Jirachi Prism combo with Scoop of Net, Oranguru, and Mr. Mime.
Yeah, there's actually a surprising amount of Zacian v Jirachi and Luke Metal Zacian. There were 32 people playing Zacian Jirachi, and that had a 15% conversion rate. And then Luke Metal Zacian, there were 30 people playing it, and that had almost a 10% conversion rate. So there was a fair amount of Zacian variants floating around. And ADPZ was the most popular one, but it wasn't the most successful. So Baby Blounds also had 150 people on it, did pretty well going into day 2 at 17% of the day 2 meta. What do we think about what did we think about Baby Blounds going into Q3, Kenny?
Well, I played Baby Blounds for Q3. I think it was really strong. I think that its power is very based on how well you draw. Unfortunately, I think you can kind of lose to yourself a lot, but you also just have absurd draws. Like I know a story we were talking about is Puka, who ended up day 2ing the tournament, top 16ing, I think, got Marnied and then found 7 energy to get a big knockout, right? Like I think the deck is, you have to be okay with just sometimes you're going to draw hands that are terrible. But I think the deck is very, very strong if you have kind of like the mental fortitude not to tilt when that kind of stuff happens and just accept that it might not be your day.
How about you, Lee?
Oh yeah, I can definitely relate to that because I played Baby Bonds for Q1 and just got donked 3 times. So Baby Bonds is honestly one of my favorite decks of the format. So like I want to play Baby Bonds if possible, but what I was scared of is in a best of one, like Kenny said, you can get Marnie out of the game, you can get Stamped out of the game, or you can just draw dead and get donked. So yeah, those are the main reasons I stay away from Baby Blondes. Like in a best of one, if you just draw bad against a good matchup, it kind of sucks. Or you can draw really well against a bad matchup and win. So it's kind of like the Greninja of the format, I like to say.
Yeah, I can see that. So Dragapult VMAX, probably the most hyped card out of Rebel Clash. Now, it did pretty well in some preliminary Japanese events when it came out, so I think we were a bit prepared for it already. It was just as popular as Baby Blounds and ADPZ. It was just about as successful as Baby Blounds, a couple percent less. So it had a fairly nice showing in day one and making it into day two. It didn't win the event. Aram won the event and got second. Dragapult VMAX was kind of like supposed to be the big thing. Do you think Dragapult underperformed? Do you think it performed at its potential? What do you think about it, Lee?
Yeah, I think Dragapult performed fairly well. I believe they got 2 of the top 8 spots in the last qualifier. I think it has a pretty decent Baby Blounds matchup because you can spread damage, so you can take multiple knockouts in a turn while also Marnieing them every turn. I believe its Pika and ADP Zacian matchup are kind of iffy depending on how well you draw, but just the natural ability to do 130 with Horror Energy with Giant Bomb, spread damage. Also, you're 320 HP. That's not a number that a lot of decks can reach, so they have to like two-shot you at least. So I do think it did pretty well. Also, the Scoop Up Net's pretty good with Mewtwo, so I think that gives the deck an extra way of draw power.
Kenny, what did you think about Dragapult's performance?
I think it performed about at expectation. I mean, it's clearly a really good card. It's clearly a good deck. Putting 2 in the top 8, being a tier 1 deck is about right. I personally just don't really like Dragapult. It obviously, I agree that it's tier 1. I agree that it has good matchups. I don't really like playing it. I don't really like the way that it plays, but I think, you really can't complain about that kind of performance. I don't think it was going to ever dominate the format or anything like that.
Okay. What do you think about it for this upcoming week? So it's Pika matchup prior to probably the week before the Q3. Its Pika matchup didn't look terrible because it was good versus Pikas with Jirachis in it, but then people started playing the Tag Call Pika or just Jirachi-less Pika, and now Pika's kind of the problem matchup for Dragapult. Do you think with Pika being almost 20% of the meta last week, doing so well, potentially going up this week, do you think Dragapult still stands a chance? Do you think it's a okay play?
I think it's an okay play. I would be more concerned about Pika, just again with the new versions. I think Dragapult is probably at the bottom of the tier 1 plays. Like if I had played Dragapult last week, I might be trying to prepare to play something else for this week. But it's certainly a fine play. Like players are going to be successful with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say Dragapult is definitely a good play, but it's also a safe play. Like players might not want to switch their decks, so they might just want to stick with Dragapult. Like you mentioned, Luke. Before Pikarom was running Jirachi version, but more players might be running Tag Call version now with Mallow and Lana. I think Mallow and Lana and Big Charm will swings the matchup because normally I would say the Pikarom matchup is 50-50 with Dragapult, but because of Big Charm, because of Mallow and Lana, it might be more difficult for them now. But I do expect it to be played a lot just because it has a decent Baby Blounds matchup and pretty good against everything else as well.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about some of the lesser played decks, but still fairly successful. So a handful of players decided to bring Obstagoon, which saw almost no talk or no hype for this tournament up until it was briefly mentioned in our meta discussion before Q3. One of my guests brought it up, and I almost, me and some friends decided it was a good play at like 1 a.m. But Obstagoon, so it looks like it kind of takes advantage of part of the meta. Dragapult's weak to it, even though it's not a basic Pokemon. Kenny, what do you think about Obstagoon? Do you have any kind of opinion on these kinds of decks that are kind of, it has options, but it's also kind of linear. You're hoping your opponent can't play around it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I don't remember who it was. It was someone in the Team Gas chat. I think it was Luke, actually.
I believe. Tate.
It was you?
It was me and Tate. It was one of us. We were both talking
Someone said something right before Q3 that was like, basically it's just like Baby Blounds, except for you have to dig for like rare candies and scoop up nets instead of energies and fire crystals and stuff.
Tate, yeah.
I think that's like a really apt description of it, is just sort of like, I think it's fine. I think it's a single prize attacker deck that can do a bunch of damage. I think when you compare it directly in that way to Baby Blounds, I would rather be on the Baby Blound side of that thing. But there's no question that like just being able to, shut off all basic attacks is really, really powerful. I know Grant Manley, who's a player that I think is really, really good and really respect his like meta calls, played it. Him and Chip both made day 2 with it. But I expect it to stay about where it was. Like it's a fine deck, but it's not gonna, it's not gonna cruise into tier 1 and dominate or anything.
Cool. Next one I wanted to talk about was mill decks. We can lump mill and control into the same thing, I guess. There was a deck that some people are calling control that made top 4, but it was also kind of mill. It had a control package in it. Not really sure what you want to call it, but Lee, what do you think about mill and control, either one or both in general?
Yeah, obviously mill and control kind of took a hit because we have bosses order now, so people can guess up the Zacians or the Chinchinos or whatever their draw power for the mill is. I still think it's a good deck. Like, mill's just always been a great deck. No matter what counters come into the game later on. And I believe a mill deck made top 4. He was running the Stamp Power Plan Articuno package, so he could lock his opponent out of the game while also milling them. So I think mill and control could be a really good play for Q4, honestly.
Kenny, any thoughts?
I think those decks, again, lumping sort of any kind of control, mill, not attacking to win the game sort of decks together are always going to be good. I think that the formats tend to trend in a way where, like, once those decks figure out what they need to counter, how exactly they need to play, they can really dominate. I don't expect it'll win the event or anything, but it'll definitely be a player. And I think that if you're a good controller stall player and you can make a good list, I think you could go really deep in this event.
Yeah, and again, I like to bring out the best of one. Again, you can have mill is kind of a slower setup deck, so again, you can have brick games where you just start a lone Pokemon and just got donked. So that's why I think people tend to shy away from mill. They want to play a speedy, aggressive deck that doesn't lose to itself more often than not, but I still think mill will be a really good play.
Okay, so I want to move on to some questions I got. Like I said, we got some questions from Discord, Twitter, Facebook, etc. This one is, should I play Mallow and Lana in Aram?
Ken, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I think that the tag call package is good. I don't know. It just kind of comes down to what you expect. I would expect there to be a lot of dragapult. I would expect that Mallow and Lana will serve you fine. I don't have enough experience with the current builds of Aram to really give a definitive answer that'll affect someone's deck list and chance at the tournament or anything. But I don't think it's like a ridiculous thing to do. I don't think it's bad.
Yeah, I think it depends on what version of Aram you choose to play. You could either play the Jirachi version, which I think it's the version. I don't know if I could say it's better than the tag call version, but it is a little faster because you have the Denny's to speed up your draw. But I do think that if you play the tag call version, you should definitely play with Mallow and Lana to help the dragapult matchup.
Next question, is Energy Denial worth changing your play for, or you're changing your deck selection for, and can you tech against it? Which decks are capable of teching against Energy Denial? So basically just any thoughts you have on Energy Denial, like the decks that people are throwing 4 Crushing Hammers and a couple of Yell Grunts, things like that. Like, you'll even see Aram lists, just 4 Crushing Hammer, Dragapult list 4 Crushing Hammer, ADPZ 4 Crushing Hammer. Do those decks have any merit, and what do you do against them? Do you worry about those, Kenny?
I think the decks do have merit. I'm kind of suspicious of just kind of jamming 4 Crushing Hammers in whatever random deck, just because it's just literally cards that can do nothing. But obviously the upside is really, really high. I don't think there's not many ways. I don't think you should change your deck selection around them. I think those sort of decks will not be prevalent enough that you should switch your deck entirely. I think in game you can, maybe just make an attachment even if it's not optimal or something. Like you're playing a welder deck and sometimes you just want a welder and not attach on a certain turn, but maybe if you're expecting to play against a lot of Crushing Hammer decks, which again, you can see the deck list, maybe you just make that attachment, but I wouldn't let it affect your deck choice more than anything else.
Yeah, like Kenny said, it's definitely something you should be worried about in this format. The energy denial, obviously, with the Yell Grunts, but with Yell Grunts and Hammers. But I don't think you should change your deck around it if you're comfortable with the deck you already have chosen. But I believe some counters are, naturally, Welder decks have a natural energy denial counter because they can attach multiple energy. adpz Zacian can run energy switch, so you can switch off or energy switch and energy off the Zacian to the ADP to get the alt creation. So I think like if you have a deck that can fit a natural counter to energy denial, you should play it. But otherwise, I wouldn't necessarily change your deck completely because of it.
Cool. My next question is Pikarom fine as it is? Does it need to adapt from its lists from Q3 to stay at the top? Or is it just fine?
I would say Pikarom is fine. I mean, I like the Big Charm Pikarom in particular because you added a little extra HP to your Pikarom or your Raichu, so it makes it tougher to knock out. But I believe Pikarom lists have more often not been the same. Like you run cards that help you get the turn 1 full blitz if possible, or you run the tag call version that gives you multiple options with the tag call supporters like Guzman, Hala, Mal, and Lana. So I think Pikarom lists are fine the way it is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I like the tag call version personally, but I think whatever version that you decide to run should just try to run a really focused version of that. Even in the tag call version, you're going to be less explosive, but you definitely just want to maximize the chances of just early aggression. And I would have to look at the top lists, I guess, that one and kind of see if they need any changes. But as an archetype as a whole, like the deck doesn't need to retool itself at all.
Yeah, I think the Pikarom list that made top 8 ran Marnie. I really like that addition. I'm not sure how well it works, but Marnie seems like a really cool addition to Pikarom because it gives you an answer to Obstagoon because you can Marnie them and then paralyze them with Raichu. I think that's a really strong play. But yeah, Marnie is really good as fit in Pikarom. I never thought of it like that before I saw the list from Q3, but could definitely be good. So that's something I would consider running that isn't usually in Pikarom lists that I've seen so far.
Next question. This is an interesting one. If you had to rank something as the best deck in format right now, what would it be?
I don't know. Based off results, I would have to say Pikarom. Obviously, it's the best deck right now. But personally, I would say Baby Blounce is naturally, like, if you can draw everything with Baby Blounce, it's just naturally the best deck in format. I can say that about Obstagoon, too, because Obstagoon, like, auto wins a majority of the decks in the format. But it's just the Obstagoon and Baby Blounce just have trouble losing to themselves more often than not and not drawing well. So
they have really high potential.
For sure. So on one side, you can say Obstagoon and Baby Blounce are the best decks because they can win a lot more matchups than Pika can. But Pika, based off the results, I would have to say is the best deck in the format right now.
I feel mostly the same. I mean, I think Baby Blounce is the best deck, but I appreciate the way this question is worded. I think, Baby Blounce or Pikarom are the best deck. I guess I would just say Baby Blounce because I prefer that deck. But I do think that it's important for viewers to take away that, like, that's not really something that matters. I think you making the tier list, Luke, was really important because I think it's much more valuable to think about decks in tiers like that, where Pikarom, ADPZ, Dragapult, Baby Blounce, like, those are all just the tier 1 of decks. Those are all just the best decks. There's not really that much difference between them, and I think being too concerned with the ranking them 1, 2, 3, 4 just isn't really important as understanding kind of their place in the format.
Word. Let's look for the next one. What are the best techs for Q4? Are there really good general techs? I don't know about, so Mew I think is the one that's obvious. Again, it helps versus Pikarom. It's just kind of a thing that most decks can kind of jam in there. On my stream, I've been a pretty big proponent of playing Beastbringer if you're going to play Baby Blounce. I think with all the Pikarom, and I would also expect maybe a little bit more Mewtwo and things like that, that card is just something I didn't play in Q3, but I think you would kind of be crazy not to in Q4. But I can't think anything else off the top of my head that's kind of a general tech for any deck. How about you, Lee?
Yeah, definitely agree with Kenny that Mew should definitely be on the top of the tech list if you can fit it in your deck, and it can naturally win you against, or naturally swing the matchup or the Pika matchup in your favor. definitely play Beast Springer if you play Baby Bounce, because you need that to help the prize trade if you fall behind. One thing I think I would consider running is Tool Scrapper, because Dragapult lists are running Giant Bomb now, so getting rid of Tool Scrap or getting rid of Giant Bombs or even Escape Boards on Jirachi with Tool Scrapper could really be good. So I think those are main techs I would look forward to.
I think my 3 top techs right now are Mew, like you guys said, but also Power Plant and Stamp, because I think all 3 of those can affect your Pika and Baby Blonde's matchup. Like I said, Mew is also good because Baby Blonde likes to clean up with Cramorant endgame sometimes, and then Power Plant Stamp affects both Pika and Baby Blonde's, but it doesn't only work versus those 2 decks. It's not, it's not like a Tapu Fini where it's there just for Baby Blonde's and you throw it away with Quick Ball in every other matchup. It's Power Plant Stamp can really help you anywhere. So those are cards that I've really been liking to try to work back into my decks, because they weren't too valuable, it seems like, in the Sword and Shield format, and now they're kind of coming back.
Yeah, I personally always play 1 Stamp in whatever deck I play, just because I think the card is so good, being able to stamp your opponent to 1 to limit their options. But I definitely like the Power Plant addition that you made, Luke.
Let's see. Are there any tier 1 decks that you think are going to be on the come up this week? Either popularity or success.
I could see Obstagoon succeeding. I'm trying to think of I think the fighting decks that we were talking about, Excadrill, Failing, something like that, could be on the come up a little bit. Most other stuff I think is held back by like one of the bigger decks, but those two I think could definitely be players for sure.
What about Mewtwo? We've talked about it very, very slightly. I think Mewtwo was actually a really good play last week, and it wasn't really talked about much, and I think a lot of people start figuring it out, like in the 11th hour, that Mewtwo would be good. Do you think it suffers too much versus Baby Blounds and Dragapult, or because it takes favorable Pika and ADP, but then it's iffy versus Baby Blounds and Dragapult? Do you have any opinions on Mewtwo variants as a whole, Lee?
Yeah, I honestly thought Mewtwo would be one of the most played decks in Q3 just because it's something that everyone's familiar with, and it has naturally good matchups against the new decks, such as Pika. Actually, me and Kenny Britton had a conversation. He said that Mewtwo actually had the highest conversion rate in day 1, like the most people played it. So I was kind of shocked.
Yeah, Mewtwo Welder had a 30% conversion rate.
Wow, yeah. So I didn't realize it was that high because I didn't see it at all in day 2, but I do think Mewtwo could be a good play for Q4 if people are willing to play it. Again, it's kind of an iffy deck because it relies on Welder to attach energies and draw, and like it's kind of slow against a lot of other decks, but I do think it could be a good play.
Another one is ADP Spiritomb, which Ross Cawthon actually day 2'd all 3 of the qualifiers so far with ADP Spiritomb, so shouts out to him. It had a 14% conversion rate actually in Q3. It only had about 50 players on it in day 1, but it had a pretty good success rate. What do we think about Spiritomb?
I like Spiritomb a lot. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the archetype to know that if ADP is the best way to do it, but I'm really interested in single prize attacker decks right now, and Spiritomb is just one of the best things in that realm. And Ross has proven that it's a huge player.
Yeah,
I definitely think Spiritomb could be a good play either with ADP. or I've seen a lot of Spiritomb beasts running around, just like Zapdos beasts back in the day, where you force them to take all 6 prizes. So I think Spiritomb could definitely be a sneaky play for Q4.
For sure, yeah. I think Spiritomb has a good matchup spread on paper. I also think Obstagoon has a good matchup spread on paper, but with that one, I feel like the Obstagoon matchup spread is hard for me to take with more than a grain of salt, because it is like, it's known for not having really great consistency, and it's also known for, well, if your opponent knows what they're doing, they can possibly play around you, especially like with Pika, like doing the stamp paralysis at the right times and stuff like that. Let's see. I don't think I have any other specific questions. Is there anything we didn't cover that you guys wanted to add in?
Oh yeah, I just want to add in a little more about Spiritomb. I think it's really good because the damage output is kind of up to your discretion because you can move damage counters around with Jinx, and you have Big Charm and Hustle Belt to do even more damage. So I think the damage output that Spiritomb could potentially do is really good. So I think that's why it could be a good play, because it can possibly one-shot a lot of decks.
For sure, yeah. And Dragapult's weak to it.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's actually really underrated. I think one thing that I've thought about and talked about a lot recently is how we have a lot of decks in the format right now, I guess Blacephalon and Spiritomb specifically, that are single prize attackers that can take big one-hit KOs and do a bunch of damage. Traditionally, we've seen, like Malamar decks, for instance, have single prize attackers, but that are kind of trading on doing 2-hit or 3-hit knockouts or whatever. And I think when you can have something that is winning the prize trade on both axes, I guess, kind of taking more prizes than your opponent and giving up fewer, it's really, really strong. I just don't know the right shell exactly for Spiritomb.
Word. All right. Before we wrap things up, I do want to ask, I usually ask about, what do you think the most popular decks are going to be? In my opinion, the top two are going to be Pika and Baby Blounds. Is there any disagreement with that for popularity?
100% agree.
Definitely agree that Pika and Baby Blounds should be at least in the top 5 decks played this weekend. I actually thought Abilities would have been played more than it actually was, because you have Eldegoss now to get extra welders. So I was surprised at that. I'm not sure how much it was played in day one, but
50, I think. 50 people.
50 people? Yeah, I was surprised that more people didn't play. I know Azul played it in Q3, I believe. So I honestly thought that was a good deck heading into Q3 and something I had to be potentially worried about, but it kind of surprised me that it wasn't as played as much. Also, Toxtricity I think is really good, and it's another deck that I didn't see played as often.
Yeah, about 25 people played that one, so it was definitely on the lower end of popularity. So Pika Rom Baby Blound's definitely going to be popular. Is ADPZ still going to be fairly popular, even though it wasn't the most successful deck? It had 150 people. Do you think that's going to go below 100 for this week?
Yeah, I think ADPzation. Well, I'm personally playing ADPzation for.
So there's one.
I do think that it will go down a little just because the deck naturally has a difficult Pika matchup. So I think people will be scared of it and shy away from it. But I still think it's a solid play if you don't know.
I would expect around 100. It's gonna dip a little bit, but not. It's not going to be. It's still going to be one of the more popular decks.
Cool. And my last question is going to be, what decks from outside of Tier 1 do you think you'll see in top 8? So if we're calling Tier 1 Pika, Blounds, ADP, and Dragapult, are there any decks outside of there you would expect or wouldn't be surprised to see in top 8? Kenny?
Let me look at the tier list you made real quick.
Yeah, no worries.
I was looking at this earlier. I tried to let me pull a spicy hot take here. I definitely think we'll see a control. Go on, Lee.
Yeah. That's just what I was gonna say. We would definitely see if a control makes top 8, we would definitely see a control in top 8. Yeah. Other than that, maybe a Mewtwo could sneak in. I could see Mewtwo potentially making top 8 if it hits the right matchups. But those two decks and Obstagoon obviously, because Obstagoon can just run through the meta if you draw well. So those are 3 decks I would expect to see in top 8 if they make it there.
Yeah, those are probably the 3 most likely, I think.
Cool. All right. Lee, what are your top 3 plays for the tournament?
Right now, I am strictly looking at ADPzation just because it has to. It's less likely to lose itself. Otherwise, I would play Baby Blounds. So those are my top 2 picks, and I guess my third choice would probably be Pika if it comes down to that.
Just because it's a good default one last week.
Yeah,
why
it's
not,
a
right?
good default option, yeah. But I definitely expect to be playing ADPzation or Baby Blounds this weekend.
Cool. And how about you, Kenny?
Yeah, my list is the same as Lee's, but just rearranged. I think I'm 90% to play Baby Blounds, 8% to play ADP, and then 2% to play Pika. Pika's kind of the backup last choice of the Tier 1 decks for me, and I expect to be playing Baby Blounds.
Yeah. Also, the thing is, I realized if I play Pika, I might have to play a lot of Pika mirrors, and I just don't like that matchup at all. So
yeah, that's horrible.
That's one thing you have to be worried about if you decide to play Pika. You're most likely going to run into a lot of mirrors, unfortunately. So that's what's kind of pushing me away from it, even though it's a solid play.
All right. Well, thank you guys for being on here. Lee and then Kenny, would you like to do your shout outs and anything like that?
Yeah, just shout out to Team Gas. Thank you for all the help you guys do, all the great content you guys create. So.
Yeah, thanks Team Gas. It's been good being the newest member, Cutter Gas. Be sure to follow me on Twitter. Check out my Twitch stream. I'll be streaming tonight. I don't know when this is going up, I guess, but stream Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And thanks to you for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, no worries. Thank you both for being here. As always, shout out potownstore.com. Get your ptcgo codes there. Subscribe to this channel if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more content like this in the future. Good luck in Q4, and if anyone is venturing into the Players Cup, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.